Ladies and gentlemen, this is Adam Fishman. I'm the Executive Director of American Friends of Likud, and we have the distinct honor and privilege of having with us Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, former National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, the Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies. I will turn it over in a moment to our President Club member from the West Coast, Steve Goldberg, to do a proper introduction of Dr. Lerman. I just want to also remind everyone that these are exclusive briefings, and they are generally only open to our members. So if you are not yet a member, we ask you to please go to www.aflikud.org and make your tax-deductible contribution. Otherwise, you can feel free to email me at adam@aflikud.org. If you have any questions during the course of the call, you should send those directly to info@aflikud.org, and Steve and I will do our best to get those questions asked and hopefully answered. Now I'll turn it over to Steve. Steve, why don't you introduce our speaker, and then we'll take it from there.
It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Eran Lerman. Dr. Lerman has met with us numerous times in the past. He's been kind enough to give us time for his insights. He is one of the foremost security experts in Israel and has advised the Prime Minister in the past and the government, and he's got quite a bit of many years under his belt of expertise from which to give us his assessment. And with that, I'll just ask Dr. Lerman to give us his initial impressions of the security situation after the announcement by President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and announcing his intention to move the embassy there.
Adam, Steve, thanks for the opportunity. The long and the short of it is there has been a certain rise in the level of tensions. There was a night in Jerusalem. There were some violent demonstrations, including inside Israel, particularly on Route 65, leading from Hadera to Afula through Wadi Ara, which is essentially populated with Arab villages. There have been a number of cases of sporadic rocket fire from Gaza. Clearly not a Hamas military initiative, but something that Hamas has allowed to happen, being carried out probably by radical Salafi organizations in Gaza. The security forces do take into account the possibility of further attacks and further lone wolf incidents. There have been some couple of shootings in Binyamin and Samaria, which are not it's not resulting in any casualties. But yes, there has been a certain degree of rise in tensions, but statistically, this is not much of a departure from the patterns of violence we've already been seeing for some time. So basically what we should measure this is not against what the relative calm that prevailed before the declaration, but compared to the fire and brimstone promises of Hamas and others. This is quite distinctly underwhelming. And I would say the same for the reactions across the Arab world. A lot of verbiage, a lot of excited references to this, whatever, a crime against humanity, a violation of UNESCO's position that the Jews have nothing to do with Jerusalem, and so on and so forth. All sorts of excitable reactions to the declaration, but at the end, very little, if any, action. I mean, the Lebanese government has spoken of economic measures against the United States. That's rich in itself, and moreover, this is probably a reflection of Hezbollah's frustration with the U.S. financial sanctions that have had some very serious impact on their ability to do business with Lebanese banks. So I would say that the only specific outcome, if that's the proper term, so far has been the Palestinian decision not to meet with Pence and to sort of fire the United States from its traditional position as a mediator. Problem is the Palestinians have no alternative. And even the French President Macron, when Netanyahu was there just yesterday, was very clear in saying that as long as the Trump administration is in action, France is not going to undermine its efforts and its authority. That's an interesting note. So the Palestinians basically will have to prove that they are willing to engage with the U.S. administration. And they have, I think, have already put a ladder leaning on the tree they climbed up, in the sense that they are now talking about quartet initiatives. In other words, if the American peace efforts, are properly camouflaged as coming from the full quartet, that's the U.S., EU, Russia, and the UN, then this would provide the Palestinians with an excuse to desist from the current attempt to boycott American peace efforts. So for the time being, it looks like the Trump administration read the lay of the land fairly accurately, in assuming that this will not lead to an uncontrollable wave of rage and violence, and that the Palestinians are the ones who are finding themselves increasingly lonely at the top of the tree they climbed on and are looking for a way out. Questions?
Yeah, I'll ask the first question, which is, I think Hezbollah, Nasrallah, announced that Trump's declaration about Jerusalem is the beginning of the end of Israel. That's according to the Times of Israel. How would you assess the threat from Hezbollah and Lebanon, whether or not it's actually increased as a result of Trump's declaration? In other words, what do you see as the strategic threat coming from southern Lebanon?
Well, as regards the position of Hezbollah on our survival, I could easily quote, I think it was Mark Twain, rumors about demise are a bit premature. Hezbollah has been an anti-Iranian, specifically Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, unelected dictator of Iran, have been telling the world for years now that Israel's life will not last much longer. Sometimes they were willing to risk a guess as to whether this will happen in 20 or 30 years. More or less the opposite is what's happening. We are thriving both internally and economically and internationally. But Hezbollah is constantly obliged to sustain a sense of revolutionary fight, of resistance, so-called, or jihad, and so they make these noises. Are they actually willing right now to risk the consequences of a confrontation with Israel that would, even in the best of cases, from their point of view, would end up with a military capacity greatly reduced? And then the Sunnis of Syria and Lebanon would take their revenge in the most terrifying manner. Hezbollah has a lot to think about. So the bluster does not necessarily reflect the real assessment of how dire the situation is.
How vulnerable are the Israeli civilians and infrastructure to rocket or missile attacks from Hezbollah if it decides to initiate confrontation?
Well, we are going to take serious. If a full confrontation erupts, we are going to find ourselves under heavy fire. aimed at our civilian population centers all over the country, particularly in the north, which would make what happened in 2006 look quite benign in comparison. However, I would expect that we would be on the offensive in a very significant way much earlier than we did in 2006. And so their capacity to launch would be swiftly eroded. Not to mention that we have an ace or two up our sleeves that they are not, I should assume they know very little about. And of course, our missile defenses are not only Iron Dome, but the upper layers as well, are in a much more than they have been in 2006, or even in the fighting with Hamas 3 years ago. Now, I think Hezbollah is not keen to find out how much we have actually improved in recent years.
With regard to Gaza, there have been some rockets coming out of Gaza since the declaration. Do you foresee any increase in the rocket attacks or in potential suicide bombings or other Hamas-inspired terror attacks inside Israel?
Well, for sure they would love, if they could, they would love to push their activists in the West Bank, in Yehuda Shomron, to not only take the lives of Israelis, but also to put supremely embarrass the Palestinian Authority. But they are under very close supervision, both by us and by the Palestinian Security Service. Not because the latter have become, pro-Israeli or pro-Jewish, but simply because they have a lot to lose if Hamas takes control. So the West Bank is where, or Yehuda Shomron is where the struggle will continue. In Gaza, we have a very strong deterrent posture. And I suspect that Hamas is also getting very clear and brutal messages from the Egyptians, telling them to be careful not to be dragged into an act of folly.
With regard to the Palestinian Authority, has there been any change in the cooperation to the extent it's existed with the PA security forces and stopping terror attacks emanating from Yehuda and Shomron?
Well, it's always a patchy thing, and we never rely entirely only on what they have to offer, and they, let's say, are careful not to emphasize this aspect of the relationship just now, because that would put them in a very paradoxical light. Having said this, I believe that the basically security cooperation is still quite extensive and quite useful.
If Abbas's term in office finally ends, since I think it's 13 years since he was elected to a 4-year term, if he finally loses power, do you foresee any change in the relationship with the Palestinian Authority?
Well, it depends, of course, on very much on the question of who may be able to take over. I know that there are some Israelis who would like to see a murderer like Barghouti, who enjoys public support.
Well, Alabama's a state that the president carried with 62%. Alabama is remarkable. So that clear.
Hello? Hello?
The host has joined the conference.
Hello?
Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for dropping off the call there. We got dropped for a moment. Steve, I apologize, and to all those who are still with us, thank you for staying with us. I apologize for cutting you off there, Dr. Lerman, in the middle of your response. Why don't you continue where we left off just a moment or two ago?
I said when Abbas departs the scene, some Israelis have been banking on former terrorists or convicted murderers from Barghouthi to Mohammed Dahlan. I doubt if that's a very useful proposition. There are some professional people, particularly in the security forces, which have learned the hard way that working with Israel is better than working against Israel. I'm not entirely pessimistic. Probably any person younger and more energetic would probably be able to do more than Abbas, not because he doesn't understand the issues, but because he lacks the courage and the political legitimacy to do anything that could lead to the complicated and possibly ugly but workable compromise that could emerge from a serious negotiation. For the time being, he's made it his policy to avoid the necessary decisions, and I don't. In his case, at his age, I don't think this would change.
If I can jump in here, a question from one of our President Club members in New York, Jacob Navon, is asking about the relatively muted reaction so far, in addition to the muted reaction so far, that the Bahraini delegation did not cancel their trip. And he goes on to say that he believes the Trump administration did not surprise our Gulf friends with their intent to make this declaration, and they knew about it well in advance. But what can we conclude about the Gulf states at this point with respect to what's going on?
Well, I can put it in no uncertain terms. What bothered the Saudis this week was not the Trump declaration. It was the brutal assassination, butchery of a man who was their enemy until recently and then tried to defect from the Houthi, the pro-Iranian forces in Yemen over to Saudi Arabia, former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. And he didn't make it within a mile out of town when he was blown to pieces. So the Saudis have a lot to worry about in an existential life and death fight with the Iranians. They apparently have no need and no wish to waste too much energy and too much of their resources and their standing in the U.S. on the Trump language.
Dr. Lerman, do you have any idea what's supposed to be in any of the aspects, what's supposed to be in the peace plan that the Trump administration is cooking up?
Well, no. At the end of the day, everything that you read is a piece of either speculation or manipulation. And I would be very cautious about relying, for example, on the story that the New York Times ran about what exactly did MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, say to Abbas. These may be, for all I know, manipulative attempts to drive the U.S. to change its position. Having said so, I think there's a kernel of truth in the argument that the administration is now actively trying to explain to the Palestinians through actions such as the Jerusalem Declaration that the outcome that they envision cannot be achieved unless they compromise with Israel on some major issues. That there will be no imposed solution, and after all, the Trump administration is now being, let's say, questioned about actions taken to try and dissuade certain international players from voting for UN Security Council Resolution 2334. Regardless of the aspects of this particular question, or whether it was a legitimate exercise or not, the essence of it is an attempt to break the grip of this Palestinian delusion that they can get the international community to coerce Israel into giving them what they want. And once this delusion is broken, then we could actually move.
And to the situation with Turkey, which has been bad for a while, is there any threat from Erdogan?
Well, there's a lot of bluster from Erdogan, including all kinds of foul-mouthed slogans against Israel and the children, this and that. But I think I know the score. It strikes me very much as an attempt to cover up for the fact that he is not going to deliver on his promise that he would cut off relations with Israel as soon if Trump declares. I think he's dialing back. He is signaling that he understands the need for Turkey to be there for the Palestinians, and of course, if you want to be there for the Palestinians, then you need to be here in Israel working with us, because otherwise they have no access to the Palestinians. And I think he's basically walking himself back from the brink, while muttering curses and saying all sorts of unpleasant things about Israel and the Prime Minister.
Last question for you is Iran. The building a land bridge to the Mediterranean coming across Syria and Lebanon. How serious is that threat, particularly with the presence of Russian troops there?
Well, I think the Russians and the Iranians have different purposes. I don't think the Russians are actually interested in serving Iran's purposes in Syria. I think they are quite worried that the Iranians are dragging Assad into the abyss, and we are counting on this, let's say, daylight between Russia and Iran to prevent the situation where the Iranians would have a free run of Syrian territory for their purposes. It's a complicated exercise that we are running, and there are aspects which are clearly problematic. But at the end of the day, I think we can let's say, put our finger on the points of difference between Iran and Russia, and try to turn this to our advantage.
Okay. With that, I thank you. I turn this back over to Adam.
Yes, I wanted to thank you, Steve, for moderating, and of course to you, Eran, for joining us tonight here in Israel this afternoon in the United States. I want to thank everyone on the call. If you didn't have a chance to hear the whole thing or got in late, I'm going to be posting this on our website, aflikud.org, and I'll be happy to forward it to anyone's email. I want to thank everyone again, and I look forward to speaking to you all again the next time that we have our exclusive conference call briefing with American Friends of Likud. Have a good day, everyone, and happy Chanukah, Chanukah Sameach to all. Thank you very much, Dr. Lerman. Bye-bye.
Bye.